But we have one final step when studying the literary context of the epistles, and that step, after we've traced the argument throughout the entire book, we need to do a little bit of summarizing. So we're going to summarize the parts in the whole. I'll explain what I mean by this in a minute. So we have definitely been in the weeds of tracing the argument and just following the flow of thought of every little sentence. But that process doesn't give us a lot of help in understanding the book's overarching message as a whole. We need to do a little bit of summarizing. So our goal would be to write kind of a short statement for the whole book. Like this is the purpose of the book of 2 Corinthians. Goom, one sentence, maybe two. But in order to get to that point, we should summarize each of the component parts within that book. In this case, it's 1 Corinthians. So what I think is helpful is to go back to your diagrams, your syntactical outlines, and to kind of summarize each of these component parts. And you'll probably have to do a lot of cutting of material out and probably combining a lot of diagrams into one in order to summarize them well. And after you've summarized the parts, well, then it's so much easier to go back and summarize the whole of the book. When you say, okay, 1 through 4, it's doing this thing. 5 to 6, I've studied 5 to 6 pretty closely. I know that 5 to 6 is making this contribution to the message as a whole. Let me show you kind of a summary diagram that I made for chapter 7 of 1 Corinthians, and you'll kind of see my process a little bit. Jump back to Logos here. So here is, let me go to 1 Corinthians 7. So here's my diagram, and I've just kind of simplified it all, just kind of stripped out all of the additional details that Paul provides. Once I've done this, once I've simplified my work, and I can see clearly, all right, this is how Paul is making his argument. I've traced that argument here in chapter 7. Then I can go back and I can make a summary statement of that paragraph, of that thought unit. And this is what my summary statement is. Paul confronts the Gnostic heresy in Corinth, a heresy which holds that physical matter is evil and therefore physical acts like sex should be avoided. He confronts that heresy by approving Christian marriage, although he does uphold singleness as advantageous for those who are fully devoted to the service of the Lord. So yeah, we've gone through a lot of steps, a lot of detail in our attempt to understand and explain how to study the New Testament letters. But I hope that you've gleaned a few different things. And let me just kind of summarize where we've been so far. So in order to read the epistles well, that requires us to read them in context. And there are two different contexts that we need to be aware of, the situational context and the literary context. The situational context teaches us the occasion of the letter, what prompted its writing, what was the backstory. And in order to figure that out, we have to do a little bit of detective work, because it's like we're listening to one side of a phone conversation. And in order to figure out that context, I do find it's helpful to start with some secondary sources, but then to do your own reading, looking for clues describing what that relationship was. And then after doing that, you'll throw it all together in a summary statement of the context of that letter. The literary context begins with breaking that letter down into each of its component parts, and then isolating the paragraphs, studying each of those paragraphs closely, tracing their logic, and then going back and summarizing first each of those major sections. And then having done that, you can more easily summarize the book's message as a whole. And with those tools, in your toolbox, we are ready to dive into the book of Romans.